Thank God, this incredible HFY masterpiece found you today. Witness the legend starting now. The conclave of eternal voices had been operating under the same fundamental assumption for approximately 47,000 years, which in cosmic terms was practically yesterday, but in bureaucratic terms might as well have been eternity. That assumption, carved into crystalline data sheets and burned into quantum archives across 16 different star systems, was magnificently simple. They had cataloged every dead language in the known universe, and they were very, very proud of it. The temple station of voices hung in the darkness between sectors like a monument to organized pedantry, its architecture a grotesque marriage of ancient religious aesthetics and cutting-edge translation technology. 17 different species had contributed to its design over the millennia, which explained why certain corridors defied basic geometry and why the bathroom facilities remained a mystery to anyone visiting for the first time. The station processed approximately 4 million linguistic requests per cycle, maintained archives on 63,000 extinct civilizations, and GT music, and GT, and employed a staff of 800 translation priests who took their jobs with the kind of seriousness music usually reserved for bomb disposal. Experts and tax auditors. High translator Vexthalan had been one of those priests for 312 years, which meant he had forgotten more about dead languages music than most species would learn in their entire evolutionary history. He was a Catholic, which meant he possessed 8 eyes arranged in 2 curved row scales that shimmered an irritating shade of bureaucratic purple, and a sense of superiority that could fill a small planet. Each morning Vexthalan performed his devotions before the archive, recited the 17 sacred protocols of linguistic preservation, and firmly believed that the universe operated according to predictable, well-documented rules. This particular morning cycle, however, the universe had prepared something special for Vexthalan, though he did not know it yet. And GT music, and GT, he was reviewing reports in the chamber of perpetual documentation when his assistant, a gelatinous blob named Cool, formed. And GT music, and GT, who communicated through color changes and exasperated sighing sounds, oozed into the room with news. We have a problem. Cool form bubbled, flashing concerned orange. We always have problems, Vexthalan replied without looking up from his data pad. Zentari delegation is upset about our classification of their 3rd dynasty dialect, the Morpheus Collective claims. We mispronounce their death rituals again, and someone keeps leaving food waste in the sacred archive cooling systems. This is different. And GT music, and GT, it involves humans. Vexthalan's eyes all swiveled to focus on his assistant. Humans, of course it was humans. Species had only joined the galactic community 47 years ago, and in that cosmically insignificant span of time, they had managed to irritate music, confuse and perplex virtually every established institution. They ignored protocols, asked uncomfortable questions, and had the audacity to suggest that things might be done differently. Worse, they sometimes had good ideas, which was unforgivable. What have they done now? One of them was caught exploring the forbidden sector, specifically the ruins of the first makers in the Kelvos region. Vexthaland scales rippled music with annoyance. The forbidden sector was forbidden for excellent reasons, primarily that the conclave had declared it so approximately 12,000 years ago, and changing their minds would require admitting they might have been overly cautious. NGT music. NGT the ruins of the first makers were particularly sacred because the makers represented the oldest confirmed advanced civilization music in the known galaxy, the genetic architects who had supposedly uplifted dozens of species from primitive animals to starfaring peoples some 2 million years prior. And what was this human doing there? Tourism, theft, research. Apparently, she is a linguist and archaeologist. Her name is Dr. Miriam Akefer. NGT music. NGT, and according to her file, she has 17 academic credentials, has been kicked music out of 4 universities for violating research ethics, and once punched a Centauri diplomat who told her women should not study dead things. Delightful, and now we have to deal with her. The council demands she appear before the full assembly to explain her trespass. They want to make an example of her. Vexthaland side. NGT music. NGT, which in Catheric's physiology sounded like air escaping from a particularly judgmental balloon. Very well, send the summons. Let us lecture another human about respecting boundaries they do not understand. 3 cycles later, Dr. Miriam Akefer arrived at the temple station, and from the moment she stepped through the docking port, Vexthaland knew she was going to be a problem. She was a tall human woman with dark skin, hair bound in elaborate braids, and the expression of someone who had recently endured faster-than-light travel and was prepared to make it everyone else's problem. She carried a battered field pack, wore clothes that appeared to have been through several archaeological digs without benefit of washing, and most egregiously, she had brought a thermos of something she called coffee, which she kept sipping with loud, inappropriate slurping sounds. The chamber of judgment had been designed specifically to intimidate petitioners. The ceiling arched 17 m overhead, covered in holographic projections of extinct writing systems that pulsed with ominous light. The 7 judges sat on elevated platforms arranged in a semicircle, music, each representing a different ancient species and wearing the ceremonial translation crowns that marked their authority. The crowns themselves were technological marvels, quantum linked to the archive and capable of processing linguistic data across 40,000 different parameters. They also looked to human eyes, at least, like someone had mixed a chandelier with a fish tank music and decided to wear the result. Vexthaland occupied the central position, flanked by 6 other senior priests. Zelmora of the crystalline Shainar, thorax, stonevoice music from the silicon-based Gorneth, whisper of distant stars from the gaseous rail, collective music, mandible speaker, representing the hive-minded Chekrit, and 2 others whose names were unpronounceable by species with conventional vocal anatomy. The human walked to the center of the chamber, looked up at the assembled judges, took another slurp of her coffee, and said, "Nice place, very intimidating. Did you hire a decorator, or is overwhelming pretension just a natural talent. And GT, music. And GT, several of the priests bristled. Vexthalan raised one scaled hand for silence. Dr. Akefer, you stand. Accused music of trespassing in the forbidden sector, specifically at the sacred ruins of the first makers. This is a grave violation of galactic music. Heritage Law, Section 47, Subsection 92. Clause I read the summons. And GT, music. And GT, the human interrupted. Can we skip the ceremonial outrage and get to the part where you ask me what I found? The sheer audacity of interrupting the high translator caused a collective gasp from the assembled observers in the gallery. Vexthalan felt his scales flush darker. Purple, you presume we are interested in your findings. I presume you are interested in being correct, which based on your current translations of Maker ceremonial sites you are not. The chamber fell silent. Zelmora leaned forward, her crystalline structure refracting light into aggressive angles. Explain yourself, human. The conclave has studied the makers for thousands of your years. We have translated every known inscription, every data cache, every linguistic fragment. Dr. Akefer set down her thermos. And GT, music. And GT with deliberate care. That is certainly what you believe. You are wrong. Impossible, Thorax Stonevase rumbled, his voice like grinding rocks. Archive contains complete linguistic maps of all 7 Maker dialects across their entire chronological span. Your archive, the human music said calmly, is missing an entire category of Maker language, a ceremonial tongue that predates everything you have cataloged by at least 200,000 years. I found inscriptions at Calvos that do music not match any known Maker dialect. They represent something older, something foundational. Music. Vexthalan felt something unpleasant stirring in his thorax, an emotion he rarely experienced. Uncertainty, but he suppressed it beneath layers music of institutional confidence. You are mistaken. Regional variations in Maker scripts are well documented. Whatever you found is simply a provincial style. We have already classified. Then prove it, Dr. Akefer said. I brought recordings of the inscriptions. Use your fancy archive, your translation crowns, your 47,000 years of accumulated linguistic wisdom. Decode them. Show me I am wrong. The challenge hung in the chamber like an unexploded star. Around Vexthalan, the other priests exchanged glances. To refuse would suggest doubt. And GT, music. And GT, to accept meant risking public humiliation if the human was somehow correct, which she could not possibly be, because the archive was never wrong. The archive was the foundation of their entire religious and academic identity. Pride, as it often does, made the decision. Very well, Vexthalan announced. We shall conduct the ritual of speaking. The full assembly shall witness as we decode your inscriptions and demonstrate the completeness of our knowledge. You will then apologize for wasting our time and accept whatever penalties the council deems appropriate. Dr. Akefer smiled, and it was not a comforting expression. Looking forward to it. Preparation for the ritual of speaking took approximately 2 hours, which gave Vexthalan time to regret his decision at least 47 times, though he would never admit it. The chamber transformed as Priests bustled about activating ancient mechanisms and modern technology in equal measure. The translation crowns were calibrated, their quantum processors' music synchronized with the central archive. Ceremonial incense was burned, filling the air with smoke that supposedly enhanced linguistic perception, but mostly just made music. Everyone coughed. Additional priests and scholars gathered in the observation galleries, word having spread that something interesting was about to happen, which in an institution dedicated to studying dead languages was roughly equivalent to blood sport. Dr. Akefer waded through all of this with remarkable patience, sitting cross-legged on the chamber floor and working through a series of stretching exercises that several species found anatomically disturbing. NGT, music. NGT. She finished her coffee, produced a small meal of something wrapped in foil. That music smelled aggressively of spices and generally acted like someone attending a mildly boring lecture rather than facing potential criminal charges. Finally, everything was prepared. The 7 judges took their positions, translation crowns gleaming with active power. Dr. Akefer transmitted her recordings to the central projection system, and the inscriptions materialized as massive holographic symbols above the assembly, each character floating in luminous detail. Vex Talon studied them. NGT, music. NGT, and felt the first genuine tremor of concern. The symbols were clearly Maker in origin, possessing the characteristic geometric foundations and recursive patterns, but something about their arrangement was wrong. The grammatical structures did not quite align with known patterns. The semantic layering suggested a sophistication that predated the oldest confirmed Maker texts. Begin the translation, he commanded, music forcing confidence into his voice. The assembled priests began their ritual, chanting a multi-species harmony that sounded like a malfunctioning orchestra, arguing with itself. The translation crowns hummed with power, their quantum processors churning through linguistic algorithms at speeds that would cook ordinary computing systems. The central archive engaged, pulling from databases that contained the accumulated knowledge of 47,000 years of study. The first diagnostic returned, no match found. Vex Talon frowned. That was impossible. He adjusted parameters, broadening the search to include regional variations and archaic forms. The archive processed, hummed, and returned no match found around him. NGT, music. NGT. The other priests were experiencing similar difficulties. Zelmer's crystalline structure was flickering with confused colors. Thorax stone voices rumbling had taken on a distinctly uncertain quality. Whisper of distant stars was making agitated, swirling motions. Expand the search, Vex Talon ordered. Include all relate linguistic families, Proto-Maker, Maker-descendant languages, contemporaneous civilizations. The archive groaned under the processing load. Minutes passed. The audience grew restless, and the result remained the same. No match found. This is not possible. Mandible speaker clicked. The symbols are clearly structured. Language. NGT, music. NGT. They follow rules, but the rules do not match anything in our database. Try comparative analysis, Zelmer suggested. Match individual characters' music, too. Known systems, they tried some symbols. Showed partial correlations to ancient music maker ceremonial scripts, but the grammar was completely different. The syntax was wrong, the morphological structures were alien despite the familiar visual elements. It was like reading a sentence written in recognizable letters that somehow formed words that did not exist in any language. Music. Vex Talon felt sweat beginning to form under his scales, which was physiologically uncomfortable and socially embarrassing. Around the chamber, priests were frantically consulting additional databases. NGT, music. NGT, trying increasingly desperate analytical approaches. The translation crowns were producing error messages in 17 different languages, which would have been impressive if it was not deeply humiliating. 15 minutes passed, then 30. The audience began murmuring. Dr. Akafor checked something on her wrist device that apparently told time, looking supremely bored. Finally, after 45 minutes of increasingly frantic efforts, Vex Talon was forced to admit defeat. NGT, music. NGT, we are experiencing technical difficulties with this particular sample, he announced, which was the bureaucratic equivalent of screaming into the void. The inscriptions appear to be corrupted or incomplete. They are neither, Dr. Akafor said, standing up and brushing dust from her clothes. They are perfectly clear. Would you like me to read them for you? The chamber fell into absolute silence. Several priests made sounds that in their respective languages meant approximately the audacity. You claim you can translate what the archive cannot, Vex Talon demanded. NGT, music. NGT, I do not claim anything. I can simply read what is written there. Would you like a demonstration, or should we continue wasting time while you pretend your database is infallible? Vex Talon wanted to refuse. Every instinct, every protocol, every shred of professional dignity screamed that he should music end this farce immediately, but scientific curiosity, that dangerous human quality that was apparently contagious, won out. Proceed. NGT, music. NGT, he said. Dr. Akafor walked to the center of the chamber, directly beneath music, the floating holographic inscriptions. She looked up at them, took a deep breath. NGT, music. NGT, and began to speak. The language that emerged from her mouth was like nothing Vex Talon had ever heard. It was fluid, yet precise, musical yet structured, somehow both ancient and familiar. The phonemes cascaded in complex patterns, each word a small architecture of meaning. She spoke with the confidence of someone reading from a well-known text, her pronunciation clear and deliberate, and then things began happening that should not have been possible. The temple's ancient systems, dormant for thousands of years, suddenly activated. Lights pulsed in rhythm with her words. Harmonic resonances rippled through the chamber's structure. The holographic inscriptions began to glow brighter, responding to the sound she was producing. Around the room, equipment that had not functioned in living memory sparked to life. NGT, music. NGT, displays flickering with unknown symbols. The translation crowned those sophisticated pieces of technology music, that represented the pinnacle of linguistic processing, began screaming. Not figuratively, they produced actual, auditory distress signals as their quantum systems encountered data they could not process. Error messages cascaded across every available display. 3 of the crowns actually sparked and shut down completely, forcing their wearers to remove them quickly. Vex, Talon stared in absolute horror as his own crown flooded his perception with contradictory information. The language Dr. Akefer was speaking was triggering matches across hundreds of different linguistic families simultaneously, creating pattern correlations that should not exist. The archive was identifying elements of Proto-Maker and GT music and GT pre-Maker foundational structures and a dozen extinct languages from civilizations that had no known connection to each other, and beneath all of that data, a single message kept repeating: root language detected, impossible match, temporal anomaly suspected. Dr. Akefer finished speaking and looked up at the assembled judges with an expression of mild inquiry. Clear enough. Vex Talon removed his malfunctioning translation crown with trembling hands. And GT music and GT. His voice, when he finally managed to speak, came out as barely a whisper. This cannot be. And yet, Dr. Akefer said cheerfully, that language, thorax. Stone voice rumbled, his usually steady voice shaking. The archive identifies it as a root structure, the linguistic foundation from which Maker's ceremonial language descended, music. But that is impossible. Such a root language would be millions of years old. Humanity is barely 200,000 years old as a species. How can you speak something music that predates your entire civilization? Dr. Akefer smiled, and there was genuine amusement in her expression. Would you like the simple answer or the complicated one? Any answer, Zelmer said, her crystalline structure pulsing. And GT music and GT with agitated colors, please. Simple answer. Is that what I just spoke? Is Latin a dead language from Earth? Specifically, classical Latin, as it would have been pronounced approximately 2,000 years ago. It was the language of the Roman Empire. And GT music and GT used for everything from government documents to religious ceremonies. Every educated human used to learn it. Now it is mostly studied by academics. And GT music and GT and people who want to sound pretentious. At parties, the silence in the chamber was so complete that several species capable of echolocation became disoriented. That is impossible, Vex Talon said, but his voice lacked conviction. Latin is a human language. Maker civilizations existed 2 million years ago. There is no connection there. Should not be. Dr. Akefer agreed, and yet when I was at Kelvo's, I noticed something strange about the ceremonial inscriptions. The grammar looked familiar, not Maker familiar, but familiar, so I started testing. And GT music and GT. I compared the structures to Old Latin, and the correlations were disturbing. Then I tried actually reading the inscriptions using Latin pronunciation and grammar rules, and the temple systems activated just like you saw. Here she pulled out a data pad. And GT music and GT. and began projecting additional information. But it gets better or worse depending on your perspective. I have been checking other ancient alien sites across the Forbidden Sector. Would you like to guess what I found? No one answered. Everyone was too busy experiencing the intellectual equivalent of catastrophic system failure. Inscriptions from the Valkyrie ancients. They correlate strongly with ancient Sumerian from Earth, the mathematical tablets from the first calculators, dead match for Sanskrit grammatical structures, the war chants music of the progenitor species, Old Norse, Egyptian hieroglyphs mapped to music, the symbolic systems of the Zakwin founders, ancient Greek philosophical structures appear in the remains of 3 different extinct civilizations that supposedly had no connection to each other. She looked around at the assembled priests, her expression serious now. I have identified 47 distinct connections between Earth's dead languages and supposedly unrelated extinct alien civilizations scattered across the galaxy. 47. That is not coincidence. That is not convergent evolution. Music. That is a pattern, but what does it mean? Whisper of distant music. Stars asked, his gaseous form swirling with confusion. That is the question, is it not? Dr. Akifer said, your entire religious and academic framework is built on the idea that the makers music were the first, the oldest, the original uplifters who created galactic civilization. But if Earth languages, which evolved naturally on a planet the makers never visited, share deep structural connections with maker language and dozens of other ancient civilizations, what does that tell you? Vex Talon felt something cold settling in his thorax. It tells us the makers were not the first. Correct, there was something before, something much older, a previous cycle of galactic civilization that rose and fell so long ago that only fragments remain, and somehow that ancient civilization touched hundreds, maybe thousands of worlds. They left linguistic fingerprints everywhere. Music, including Earth, where those patterns evolved into human languages over millions of years. We have been speaking pieces of the oldest galactic languages all along, and we never knew it. The implications crashed through the chamber like a tidal wave. The conclave of eternal voices had spent 47,000 years studying dead languages, confident in their complete understanding of galactic history. They had built an entire religious and academic institution on the foundation of that knowledge, and now a music human, a member of a species barely old enough to have invented writing, had waltzed in and revealed that their fundamental assumptions were catastrophically incomplete. The archive mandible speaker clicked slowly, will need to be completely reorganized. That is a mild way of putting music, it, Zelmora said. If Earth languages are key to understanding music, the pre-maker civilization, then everything we thought we knew about linguistic evolution and galactic music history is wrong. Not wrong, Dr. Akefer corrected. Incomplete. You did excellent work with the information you had. You just did not have all the information. No one did. Earth was not part of the galactic community until recently, so how could you have known that our dead languages held pieces of the puzzle? This changes everything. Thorax stone voice rumbled. The timeline of galactic civilization must be pushed back millions of years, possibly tens of millions, and the Scope: if this pre-maker civilization touched Earth, which is on the far edge of the galactic arm, they must have spanned the entire galaxy. Maybe multiple galaxies. And GT, music. And GT, Dr. Aquifer added helpfully, I have been checking my translations against some of the archaeological data from the Andromeda probes. Similar patterns are appearing there too. Several priests made distressed sounds in their native languages. Vex Talon sat down heavily on his judgment platform, no longer caring about maintaining dignified posture. 312 years of certainty had just evaporated. In the space of an hour, what happened to them? He asked quietly. This pre-maker civilization, if they were so vast, so advanced, why is there so little left? That, Dr. Aquifer said, is the question I am trying to answer. And why I was poking around in your forbidden sector, because I think the answer is buried in those ruins, all of them. The makers, the Valkyrie, the calculators, all those extinct civilizations were not separate species. They were descendants of the first civilization, fragments that survived whatever catastrophe destroyed the original. They rose from the ashes, achieved spaceflight, built empires, and eventually fell themselves, but they kept pieces of the original language embedded so deeply in their cultures that even after millions of years, the patterns remained. In Earth, Zelmora asked, how do humans fit into this? We do not know, Dr. Aquifer admitted. There is no evidence the first civilization ever visited Earth or genetically modified humans. Our DNA shows clear natural evolutionary development, but somehow the linguistic music patterns were there anyway. Maybe they seeded the patterns across thousands of worlds, encoded in the basic structures of life itself. Maybe there is something about how sentient minds develop language that naturally mirrors these ancient forms. Or maybe, she paused, maybe Earth was special for reasons we do not yet understand. You do not have answers, Vex Talon observed. I have better questions, Dr. Aquifer countered, which is how progress actually works. You were so busy being certain that you stopped asking whether you might be wrong. That is not science. That is not even good religion. That is just bureaucracy pretending to be wisdom. The words stung precisely because they were true. Vex Talon looked around at his fellow priest, seeing the same realization. And GT, music. And GT, dawning on their faces. They had become curators of certainty rather than seekers of truth. They had stopped exploring. And GT, music. And GT, because they believed they had already found everything. What do you want? He asked music, the human. You came here knowing this would challenge everything we have built. You could have simply published your findings and let us look foolish. Why confront us directly? Dr. Aquifer shrugged. Because I need your help. The archive is incomplete, yes, but it is still the most comprehensive linguistic database in the galaxy. The translation crowns may have crashed trying to process Latin, but once they are recalibrated, they will be invaluable for mapping the connections I have found. And despite your institutional arrogance, you are genuinely brilliant linguists. I cannot unravel this mystery alone. No one can. It is too big, too old. And GT, music. And GT, too important. You want to work with us? Mandible speaker clicked in surprise. I Want to work with anyone interested in finding truth rather than defending comfortable lies, if that includes this conclave. Excellent. If not, I will find others, but either way the questions have been asked now. You cannot unknow what I have shown you. Vex Talon felt something unfamiliar stirring in his thorax. Excitement, music, genuine scientific excitement untainted by bureaucratic concerns. Music or religious dogma. When was the last time he had felt that? Centuries ago. Probably before he had become comfortable in his certainty. The council will need to deliberate. Music, he said formally. This revelation has significant implications for our institutional framework. Of course it does, Dr. Akefer said. And GT, music. And GT, take your time. I will be at the station bar, which I am told serves something that approximates alcohol for 17 different species. When you are ready to actually do science instead of performing theatrical certainty, you know where to find me. She picked up her field pack, her empty thermos, and walked out of the chamber of judgment with the casual confidence of someone who had just overturned 47,000 years of accumulated knowledge and was completely fine with it. And GT, music. And GT. The deliberations took 3 days, which in galactic political terms was the equivalent of moving at light speed. The Council of the Conclave, forced to confront the limitations of their precious archive, eventually reached a conclusion that was both humbling and liberating. They needed music to start over, not completely, of course. Tens of thousands of years of linguistic research could not simply be discarded, but the framework, the assumptions, music, the certainty that they had achieved complete understanding, all of that needed to go. The archive would be reorganized around the new paradigm. Earth languages would be added, studied, and used as keys to unlock mysteries they had not even known existed. The forbidden sector would be reopened for research, with Dr. Akefer as the leading consultant. Vex Talon personally delivered the council's decision to the human, finding her exactly where she had said she would be, at the station bar, engaged in animated conversation with a Zentari merchant about the merits of fermented grain beverages across species lines. Dr. Akefer, he said formally. Music. The council has reached a decision. All charges against you are dismissed. Furthermore, we would like to offer you a position as senior research consultant to the conclave, with full access to the archive and authorization to explore any site you deem relevant to your research. And GT, music. And GT. She looked up from her drink, eyebrows raised. That is generous. What is the catch? You must teach our priests about Earth linguistics, all of it. Every dead language your species has managed music to lose over its brief existence. And you must be patient with us as we adjust our understanding of galactic history and my methods. I music do not follow protocols well. I kicked out of 4 universities for good reasons. Then you will fit right in. And GT, music. And GT, Vex Talon said, and surprised himself by meaning it. The conclave has been following protocols for too long. Perhaps we need someone who remembers that the point of studying the past music is to discover the future. Dr. Akefer smiled and raised her glass. In that case I accept, but I have conditions. First, the forbidden sector gets renamed. Forbidden is just invitation to the curious, and off-limits is boring. We are calling it the ancient frontier. Second, I want a lab with proper coffee facilities, none of this synthesized approximation nonsense. Third, and GT, music. And GT, anytime the archive returns impossible. Match errors, that becomes our top research priority instead of something we ignore. Agreed, Vex Talon said. Though I should warn you, integrating Earth languages into our database will take years, possibly decades. And GT, music. And GT, then we should get started. And they did. The weeks and months that followed brought the kind of chaos music that transforms institutions. Translation. Priests who had spent centuries in comfortable certainty found themselves. Students again, learning to recognize patterns they had never imagined. The archive underwent massive restructuring, incorporating human linguistic data and discovering thousands of new connections across previously unrelated music. Extinct languages, Dr. Akafer proved to be an excellent, if unconventional, teacher, her methods involving equal parts rigorous scholarship and creative profanity. The research expanded. Teams of humans and aliens working together began mapping the full extent of the precursor civilization's reach. The scope was staggering. Every major sector of the galaxy showed traces of the ancient linguistic patterns. The civilization had been vast beyond comprehension, spanning millions of years and thousands of species. And then, 6 months into the research project, they found something that changed everything again. Dr. Akafer had been exploring ruins on a forgotten world in what had once been called the Forbidden Sector, now renamed with her slightly sarcastic blessing. The planet showed signs of catastrophic destruction, its surface scarred by weapons that predated anything in known history. In a buried vault protected by stasis fields that had run for millions of years, they found a library, not a physical library. And GT, music. And GT, something better, a quantum encoded archive that made the conclave's collection look like a child's music picture book. And it was still active, still functional, waiting for someone who could speak music, the right words to activate it. Dr. Akafer spoke those words in Latin because apparently the universe had a sense of irony. The archive opened, flooding their systems with data that music would take centuries to fully process, but the first files, the index entries, told them enough. The precursor civilization had a name. The antecedents, they had risen approximately 23 million years ago, achieved technological singularity, and spread across the entire galaxy. They had not uplifted other species through genetic engineering. They had done something more subtle and more profound. They had seeded the fundamental patterns of language itself, embedding linguistic structures into the basic cognitive development of sentient species across thousands of worlds. They had wanted their children, the species that would come after them, to be able to find each other, to recognize music, the kinship encoded in their very thoughts and words, to know they were not alone. And then something had destroyed them. The archive contained references to a threat, something from outside the galaxy, something that had forced the antecedents to make a terrible choice. They had music fought and they had lost, but they had bought time for their children to evolve, to grow, to maybe become strong enough to face what was coming, because according to the archive it was still coming. The antecedents had calculated that they had bought approximately 25 million years before the threat returned. If their calculations were correct, and if the dating systems were accurate, that meant galactic civilization had approximately 2 million years remaining. Dr. Akeffer stood in the recovered archive facility, surrounded by priests and scholars from a dozen species, staring at the data that had just rewritten everything they thought they knew about the universe. Music around her, people were panicking, arguing, refusing to believe. She took a long drink from her ever-present thermos of coffee and laughed. Everyone turned to stare at her. "You are laughing," Vex Talon demanded. "We have just learned music, that an existential threat to all galactic life is approaching, and you are music laughing." "I am laughing," Dr. Akeffer said, "because 2 million years is a really long time. The antecedents music had a few million years of preparation and still lost. We have 2 million years and we have something music. They did not. What is that? We have all their data. We know what they knew. We can learn from their mistakes, and we have something else." She gestured around at the assembled researchers. "And GT, music. And GT, representing dozens of species from across the galaxy. We have each other. All the children, the antecedents, scattered across the stars. We are all speaking their language now, whether we know it or not. And GT, music. And GT, we are already connected. That does not seem like enough," Zelmora said quietly. "It is not," Dr. Akeffer agreed. "But it is a start, and we have 2 million years to figure out the rest. I have seen what humans can accomplish in 2,000 years. I have seen what your species have done in your time spans. And GT, music. And GT, 2 million years. That is enough time to work miracles, or enough time to grow complacent," Vex Talon observed. "Then we do not grow complacent. And GT, music. And GT, we work, we research, we prepare, we become worthy of what the antecedents gave us." She raised her thermos in a toast to the ancient frontier, to uncomfortable truths, and to having 2 million years to prove we are not completely hopeless. Around her, slowly, other containers were raised. The absurdity of toasting in the face of incomprehensible threat was very human, and therefore somehow perfect. 3 years later, the conclave of eternal voices had transformed beyond recognition. The temple station still hung in space between sectors, but it was no longer a monument to certainty. It had become a center of active research filled with scholars from every spacefaring species, all working to decode the antecedent archives and prepare for a threat that would not arrive for 2 million years. But that occupied every strategic discussion anyway. Dr. Miriam Akeffer had refused the title of High Researcher, insisting she worked better without administrative responsibilities. And GT, music. And GT, she spent her time rotating between sites across the galaxy, training new generations of linguists and archaeologists music in the art of asking better questions. Her field reports were legendary for their combination of rigorous scholarship and creative profanity. Third, coffee consumption remained medically inadvisable. Vextalin, meanwhile, had discovered that uncertainty was more interesting than certainty. Music. He still served as high translator, but his role had changed. Instead of defending established knowledge, he spent his days helping to expand it. His scales music had faded from bureaucratic purple to more thoughtful shade of blue, which his colleagues insisted made him look younger. The archive had been reorganized around a new principle: every answer should lead to better questions. The 17 sacred protocols had been updated to 18 new ones, stating simply, assume you are wrong and work backwards from there. And on Earth, in universities and research centers, human linguists pored over their own dead languages with new purpose: Latin, Sanskrit, Sumerian, Egyptian, Norse, and GT, music, and GT, Greek, and hundreds of others were no longer simply historical curiosities. They were keys to understanding the galaxy's deepest past and possibly its survival in the far future. Someone had suggested creating a monument to commemorate the discovery that changed music everything. Dr. Akefer had vetoed it, saying that monuments were for dead people and dead ideas, and they had work to do. But in the chamber of judgment, where she had once stood, accused of trespassing, and had instead appended galactic civilization, a small plaque had been installed. It was written in Latin: